Hi, everyone. I'm Mad Hildebrandt, and this is the Get Mad Show. Today, our guest is John Blair, a candidate for New Mexico's Congressional District 3. John worked for the Obama administration as the Director of Intergovernmental and External Affairs at the U.S. Department of Interior. Let's go. Welcome, John. We're glad to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate the opportunity. It's great to be here.
We're really excited to have you and to be hosting candidates from CD3. And I would like to give you a minute here first before we get started, just to introduce yourself and make yourself human to your constituents.
That's great, man. Thank you. I'm John Blair. I am a third-generation New Mexican. My grandfather was born in the territory of New Mexico in a small town called Avis, which is near Weed, New Mexico in Otero County. Born in Albuquerque, and I grew up in Santa Fe. My mom and dad were both state employees. I don't come from great power or wealth or anything like that. Just a lot of public service in my family. I've spent my last 25 years working in government, both in Washington, D.C. and here in New Mexico. When I'm not doing politics, my husband, Billy, and I live in Santa Fe. We've been together for almost 11 years, married for almost 6. And at the end of the Obama administration, we moved home to Santa Fe, and we live here with our dog, CJ, who we named after a character from the West Wing TV show, CJ Craig, who we love. And so I'm excited to talk about politics and policy and get to know you a little bit better too, Matt. So thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, we're really glad to do this. And one thing that we're not glad about, any of us, is this pandemic that we're all having to deal with right now. And just like, me in my home office, you're in your, I think, dining room or kitchen area or something.
Yeah.
Wherever you are, but you're at home as well. And so that's one thing that people really want to talk about, because it's right on the top of their minds right now, is COVID-19 and what your thoughts are on, obviously not on fixing it, because that's up to scientists and medical professionals, but just what's happening in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, so we shut down our campaign headquarters about 6 weeks ago. Everyone's been working from home to help flatten the curve here. I think our governor has really done a great job in terms of really helping the state flatten the curve. There's a great story in the New York Times this morning, an opinion piece about the work she has done in conjunction with some of the hospitals in New Mexico and the labs to really help fight this disease. I think the biggest takeaway for me from this has been, this pandemic has really highlighted the great disparities in this country of the small few who have access to wealth and power, and those who are left behind. And we've seen, so many Americans and so many New Mexicans who are now unemployed or furloughed. And the stress, the economic stress that comes from that is being compounded with many of them of a loss of healthcare, with juggling, trying to take care of their kids at home now. And it's just stressor upon stressor. And I think we've really seen how most New Mexicans have been left behind by the failed policies of the Trump administration. I think President Trump has really gone out of his way to do the worst possible job of leading in this pandemic. At every opportunity to lead, he has failed. It's been all about his ego and his ratings and how people feel about him. Nothing about leading in terms of setting the example for what Americans should be doing. Nothing about showing any empathy or sense of mourning for those who've lost loved ones, but really just failing to lead. And it used to be that the rest of the world looked to the United States as an example of what should be done correctly. And now we're looking to other countries like Germany and New Zealand and other places that are really leading in terms of helping protect their own citizens. So, I think our delegation's done a great job, both in the House and the Senate, of really fighting to make these stimulus packages better. It's been horrible to see President Trump willingly deny any oversight. And so if I'm elected to Congress, that's one of the things I will fight for, is for additional oversight. It's so frustrating to see these dollars that are supposed to be going to help small businesses land in the pocket of the LA Lakers or these national food chains, these multi-million-dollar corporations. And we need to get that money back and put it into the pockets of the small business owners here in New Mexico to ensure they're able to stay alive and to keep, our communities going. And so that's one of the big things. And I think, I know that many people are getting a stimulus check. We have to keep those going. And that we don't need, that there was a story in the Washington Post a few weeks ago about how both Jared Kushner and President Trump are going to reap millions of dollars from these stimulus bills for their own businesses, and that's wrong. We need to be putting that money into the pockets of New Mexicans to ensure that people who've been unemployed, who are now unemployed or have been furloughed, that they can continue to buy groceries for their families, get the prescriptions they need, they can pay their rent, pay their mortgage. That is how we're going to keep this economy from going into a Great Depression, is if we can keep supporting hardworking New Mexicans. That's what I think we need to be doing.
Oh, yeah, I totally get that. A friend of mine that I had gone to high school with, he's still fighting for his check, and he, for a stimulus, not for his personal stimulus, but for his business. And I know that this is going on across the board. And
Yeah.
he just has a small, like an MMA um, fight school, martial arts school, but those are the people in communities who need that. It's them,
Yeah.
it's their employees that need to be paid. And so
Yeah.
when you see these huge corporations, that have millions upon millions, sometimes billions of dollars that are at ready access,
Mhm.
and
Um,
then they get the money.
and they're pocketing it. They're buying shares. It's that sort of stuff. I will tell you that what has been so heartwarming for me has been to see the ingenuity of some of these small businesses in New Mexico, of how to keep going, particularly some of these restaurants. My husband and I have been trying at least once a week to get takeout from a local favorite restaurant. And I will tell you, last Friday, we got breakfast from Tia Sofia's, which is one of my favorite restaurants in San Jose. Their breakfast burritos are amazing. And I called to place the order and went down to go pick it up. And the owner of the restaurant, it brought tears to my eyes, actually. He was running out front, delivering orders. He was rushing to get the phone. He had a mask on, he had gloves on, he was delivering food. It was so, he was hustling so hard to keep his business going. And there was no opportunity for me to give a tip. So when I called to place the order, I thought he'd come out and I had signed the thing and put a tip in there. And he just rushed out and literally dropped the food into my car and said, "Have a great day," and ran out, took off. So when I got back to the house, I called him again and I said, "Hey, it's John Blair. I was just in, and I didn't get a chance to leave a tip, and I want to see if you can charge me again." And he said, "You know what? Don't worry about it." He said, "Just keep coming back." You know,
Yeah.
and so that's amazing to me to see that sort of kindness even from him, trying to keep his business going, keep his employees
Oh,
employed.
yeah.
That's the spirit we need to be investing in. That sort
Oh,
of hard work.
it absolutely is. And that's why, we have, my husband and I have continued, even though you're thinking, oh, stay away, we've got to socially isolate. And you do, and we wear our masks and stuff, but we go out and make sure to purchase from the restaurants locally. And we've purchased some things from, like, some of the local businesses that can take it out to and deliver on the sidewalk, because you need to continue doing that. And that's what we need to do, and that's what the stimulus checks that go in our pockets, which we are, are unlikely to see until August, are
Yeah,
supposed to be doing for us today,
yeah.
and when people need it, and it's not there.
And I think, particularly as we start to see, first of all, I'm so proud of our governor and the way she's handled this work, in that, we see that we have to guide reopening the economy based on science and the advice of our public policy, public health experts, not
Right.
just whims and, some of this manufactured outrage we're seeing across the country, which is very reminiscent of the Tea Party faux outrage that was pushed years ago. But,
Yeah.
for me, it's a function of, before we can just let everybody go back to their normal life, which we can talk about that too, that we shouldn't go back to normal, but is, or do we have the testing in place to test more and more New Mexicans? I know we've done a great job here locally, but across the country, are we testing enough people? Do we have the tracing in place? And, is the public ready to really embrace what will be sort of a stair-step approach to opening businesses? And we have to just make sure that New Mexicans are ready for what will be probably for some period of time until a vaccine is in place. Social distancing, wearing your mask in public, wearing your gloves, washing, all these sorts of things we need to be doing. So it's not, I sort of made references, but I hope we don't go back to quote unquote normal, because that turns out was really horrible for most people. It turned out really were one traumatic event away from potential bankruptcy or unemployment. And so we have to really fix the system, because it's rigged now to really benefit the very wealthy and the special interests, and we have to push it back so it's benefiting everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. That is very true. Um, since we're on this topic of COVID-19, I would like to talk about another thing that's right in everybody's minds right now, and that is healthcare. And I know that you are a supporter of the public option, and having worked with Obama, we all think Obamacare, and we don't want to see that go away. So can you speak about healthcare and where you stand on that? And I know
Absolutely.
this isn't working today.
I'll tell you, it's been really amazing to drive around this congressional district, the northern part of the state, to really talk to New Mexicans and hear them talk about the difficulties of getting access to healthcare even now. Part of it is based on geography, part of it's based on income. I was in a couple communities in the far northeastern corner of the state near Clayton and in Tucumcari, and hear people talk about, if you have a baby in this community, if it's a perfect birth, you're fine. But if you have any issue, you have to get flown off to Raton or to Amarillo or someplace else. And that was before the pandemic. So it's that, when you think about it in that way of these sort of things that we take for granted in cities like Santa Fe or Albuquerque or Silver or Las Cruces, where it's easier to get access to care. So I did work in the House of Representatives when the Affordable Care Act was passed. I was working for Martin Heinrich in his House office. And so I'm a big proponent of the Affordable Care Act. And what's been so frustrating for me has been, as soon as the House Republicans took over in 2010, the first vote was to repeal it. And they kept trying to repeal the bill over and over with nothing in place, or nothing to replace it with, rather. It's just they're going to repeal it. And I think in those next 2 years, in 2011 and 2012, I think the House voted 33, 34, 35 times to repeal the bill just for political purposes. And we've continued to see President Trump and the Republicans try to chip away, the litigation for the US Supreme Court over the individual mandate, trying to get rid of that, the damage they've done to the exchanges. And so my first priority would be to restore all the damage, or to undo all the damage that's been done. Ensure that the public has access to the exchange, that they can get the care that they need, and to continue funding the system at the level it needs to be. And I know, if I were to start from scratch, if the system, I think I would advocate for a single payer system, but we're not starting from scratch. And so it's not as easy as just saying, great, let's do this.
Right.
And so what I'd love to see us do is probably similar to what Mayor Buttigieg talked about in terms of the Medicare for all for those who want it. Is I fully support building out a system that is a government-owned system that is Medicare, making it available to anyone. But we really, it's not just that. The Congress has to step in and invest in that system to ensure that it is the best system possible. And Americans know if there's a better system out there that will give them the coverage they need for themselves and their families, drop the cost of prescription drugs, they will do that. So I think, we've even seen AOC, Representative Ocasio-Cortez, say, this could be something that we get to down the road, And so I think that's the step we need to do, because the people who have pre-existing conditions now, the people who are in jeopardy of losing their insurance, or they haven't already lost it, they don't have the luxury of waiting for the Congress to get to the point that they approve a Medicare for all system. So I think we need to keep building in that direction, and I fully support that. And a big thing that we have to do as well, Matt, is really focus on the cost of prescription drugs. It is ridiculous how much people are still paying for prescription drugs. I have asthma. Growing up in New Mexico, I would come in from recess in elementary school, and my eyes would be twitching from all the juniper and everything, and the chamisa and everything outside. And so I got shots for a bunch of years as a kid, moved away to DC when I worked for Mr. Heinrich and President Obama. And over those 8 years, I lost all my immunity. So now that I've moved home again, I'm getting shots every couple of weeks now. I've reached the point I can go every few weeks instead of every week. But I have this little inhaler that I have to use every day. And when I called into the pharmacy to get it, the pharmacist said, great, it's on back order, and it's going to cost you $450 a month for this one inhaler. And I thought, I can't afford that. And so it turned out if I called back to the doctor and I used the right formulary word and did this and did that, I'm getting it, I think, for $30 a month now instead of $450. But not everybody's going to know how to do that or have the wherewithal to do that. And so we have to do a lot more to ensure that New Mexicans aren't having to choose between the medicine that they need to stay alive. And mine's just, I don't say just asthma, but it's not cancer, it's not diabetes, it's not, some sort of a heart condition. But we have to make sure that people are not being forced to choose between medicine or rent or medicine or food. And so that's a big push that we have to keep making.
Oh yeah, and when my husband was military, I was military too, I'm a veteran, but my husband, he spent 30 years in the military. And while he was in, I went through cancer. And I remember some of my treatment, just the simple treatment, um, you had to go every like three times in 1 week and get a shot. And each of those shots cost $3,000. But luckily we were military, so that was covered. And but every time I went and got that shot, I thought about how this system, how incredible that system was. And I think we're
My oldest
unstable.
sister is a survivor.
Yeah.
And she at the time was trying to get what's called the BRCA test, which would show whether or not she had a gene that was indicative of whether the other women in our family would get breast cancer as well. And she couldn't get it. And the insurance company said, well, no, it's $2,000. And she said, I have my credit card right here. And they still said, you can't do that. And so the insurance companies still have way too much control over the sort of care that people get. And, we don't want CEOs or big pharma making these determinations. Clearly, I'm proud to tell you, I'm not taking any corporate PAC money, in part because I feel like we haven't been able to make more progress on healthcare, on climate change, on getting rid of gun violence, because the corporations have such an outsized influence on what's going on. So that's one of the big pieces that fits into every debate we have around the other kinds of public policy, is about getting the big money out of politics and the dark money out of politics.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's so important, to break that connection with the corporations, and it really is. And in my campaign as well, I didn't take PAC money either, and from the big corporations. And so that is a really a good position that I'm sure a lot of your constituents are going to be very happy about. You mentioned for just right in there is climate change. And that is something that I want to switch gears and talk about right now. I know that you were the Director of Intergovernmental and External Affairs at the U.S. Department of Interior, and you took on the oil companies, and you worked on this. And so I would like to get your input on your standing on climate change. And I know this is silly to change because
I'm a long talker. Sorry about that. Yeah, Matt, that's great. So for me, it is the experience I bring to this is my time working for Senator Bingaman, who was a great champion on these sorts of energy and environmental issues. My time helping run Martin Heinrich's House office. He was on the House Natural Resources Committee at the time. And then clearly the 3 years I spent working for President Obama at the Interior Department. And I was so lucky to be on the front lines of all the major policy decisions that were being made by President Obama and by my boss, Interior Secretary Sally Jewell, that were being considered at the time. So we're talking about the Paris Climate Accord, we're talking about the methane rule, the Clean Car Rule, national monument designation, protection of natural habitat for the sage grouse and the Rocky Mountain wet. I mean, you name it, offshore renewable energy. It was an extraordinary place to be at the time. And I am so, part of my motivation is that, President Trump doesn't like Obama for a variety of reasons. Some of them racial, I think, some of them other, but he's just undone all the things that President Obama was able to do just because he doesn't like the man. And so there are things that even in this pandemic, President Trump is taking every political advantage he can to move forward with his wackadoo crazy right-wing agenda. Has let the EPA announce that corporations can be dumping during the pandemic. Is still pushing full steam ahead to overturn the Clean Car Rule that requires cars to have higher fuel efficiency standards, all these sorts of crazy things. And so for me, one of the big things is to push on is to be putting in place, to be codifying the things that President Obama had to do by rule because Mitch McConnell and his cronies wouldn't let President Obama pass any bills. So that's a big thing. For me, this actually is the issue I talk most with voters about, and I hear from voters most about. And I look at this from two different angles. One of which is, Matt, we have a moral obligation to take care of this planet for kids, for the grandkids, for the future generations, for the critters on the ground right now. The week that I launched my campaign last August, I tell the story that the whole country was joking about President Trump because that week was the week he said he wanted to buy Greenland. And it was so funny. He wanted to buy, all that sort of stuff. Late night comics were talking about it. I saw one news story that week, which was that the country Greenland in one day lost 11 billion tons of surface ice. 11 billion tons.
Yeah.
Even wrap your head around how much water that is. The one news story I saw quantified it as 7 million Olympic-sized swimming pools. And even that, how do you wrap your head around that?
Right.
But that is not a spring thaw. That's not, a seasonal change. That is a huge, that's the canary in the coal mine, right? That is telling us the earth is changing. So we have to really do all we can. And we're losing ground right now, in part because the Republicans in Congress, they're denying science, they're denying reason, and they're pretending that the climate crisis doesn't even exist. I think back to a few years ago when a senator from Oklahoma ran from the outside in Washington, D.C. and brought in some handfuls of snow and sort of joked about how can it be global warming if it's snowing? And that's stupid.
Yeah.
And it's reckless. I mean, it's all the above, right? It's all the adjectives.
Right.
And so the other part of this is that there's a real opportunity for New Mexico to be a leader in the clean energy economy. And there are a number of things that we have to do. What's striking to me about this congressional district up north, in terms of its population, is that a third of the voters in the district now live in Santa Fe County. And think about how big this district is, but a third of the people now live in this place. And I am now worried that if we don't do something to help keep some of these smaller communities alive, excuse me, the asthma, that if we don't do more for these communities, that 20 years from now, it could be 50% of the whole district. And that these smaller communities like Cuesta and Wagon Mound and Clayton and Mora, that if we're not able to, those kids graduate from high school there, they come down to UNM or Tech or State, go someplace else, and they get a degree in electrical engineering or some high tech job. What is there for them to go home to do, right? And it's harder. And so those communities are just shrinking. And so I think if we can really light a fire under the clean energy economy, we can create some really good jobs around wind, solar, geothermal, you name it. And people can continue to live in these communities that we value so much culturally and historically in northern New Mexico. But we have to have the grid in place, we have the transmission lines in place, we have to have the storage capacity in place. But there's such potential for it to be doing this. And it's, I know in New Mexico, we're so reliant on the fossil fuel economy. We have to keep pushing the state government to diversify what money is coming into the state budget. Clearly, we're between a rock and a hard place right now with our state budget. But if we can diversify, we can just really blow up the economy. One of the stats I talk about is that the federal government spends billions of dollars a year, if not more, incentivizing the fossil fuel industry. And that's part of how the gas rates are so low for our cars and oil is low and some of the stuff. There's been for decades, for generations, the federal government has supported the fossil fuel industry. And so when you hear people say, well, those renewables are just so much more expensive than fossil fuels, there's a reason for that. And there's really an opportunity for the federal government, and I would push very strongly for this, to take those billions of dollars that we're using to incentivize fossil fuels and turn them, and let's incentivize the clean energy economy. Let's get that grid in place. Let's modernize the grid, have the transmission lines, the storage, and some of that money, and this is the real thing that the federal government can do. Let's help transition people who are currently working in the fossil fuel industry. Let's retrain them to work in the clean energy economy, to work at wind turbines and solar farms. Let's do a lot around remediation and mitigation of some of these these mines all across the country. There's such an opportunity to help sustain communities like San Juan County or Farmington that as the San Juan generating station is shutting down, let's have the federal government invest in that community to teach those folks how to do the mine remediation mitigation, how to do solar, how to do wind. And it's not going to be exactly even, one for one. I don't know that I'm in a place that I could tell you we could guarantee folks will make the exact same salary, but rather than just saying you're on your own, which is what Mitch McConnell has said to the states in this pandemic, let's invest in our people in a big way. And that's what's exciting for me, because with our solar and wind potential, this can be the gold standard, the shining star of the country in terms of clean energy. And so there's not one thing to do. There are hundreds of things that we can and should be doing to really make that happen. And I'm excited to do that. Yeah. As you can tell by my rambling.
No, this is good. I'm wanting to, as I told you, go to some conversation style, and this is really good because there's a lot of good information coming out, and climate change is an area that I really care about, and it's really interesting. And in addition to that, and you touched on it, was the idea of education. Although you're talking about re-education, but you're talking about the students going down to Tech or down to State or UNM. And then one of the things that we notice here in New Mexico for sure, is that the students leave. We know this is the brain drain and all of that, but um, why don't you talk about your thoughts on education? I know that, and it doesn't have to be higher education. I mean, this is just, you can also talk about, whatever it is that you're feeling at the moment. But education is suddenly on everybody's minds because their children are home and being educated. And a lot of people, they didn't really think about it because they sent their kids to school and now they are the school. So
Right.
can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on education?
Absolutely. So my dad worked at the public education department for 31 years, and so this was a regular topic of conversation at dinner at home. Clearly, we can be doing significantly more to meet that sort of societal promise that every child get a really quality pre-K through 12 education, regardless of their zip code or their parents' income. And that's really the big hurdle right now. I'm a product of the Santa Fe Public Schools. I had a really extraordinary education. But for me, part of it was that I had two older sisters who already sort of blazed a trail for me. And I was that sort of nerdy kid I'd go volunteer for registration so I could sign up for classes first and get the classes I wanted, kind of a thing. But but again, even in the Santa Fe Public Schools, there were the haves and have-nots. I had plenty of classmates who had a horrible education, sort of fell through the cracks. We had a huge dropout rate. And one of the things that we have to think about is one of the ways that we can overturn that brain drain is to ensure that every kid is getting a great education. When my husband Billy and I moved home to Santa Fe at the end of the Obama administration, I got lots of calls from friends I went to high school with who live in Dallas and Washington, D.C. and New York and Chicago and LA. And they said, God, we would love to live in Santa Fe. We'd love to live in New Mexico. How did you afford to do it? And I had to say, well, first of all, we don't have kids, so that made it more economical to make the transition, but we both took big pay cuts. And we were able to factor that in. It was important for us to come home to New Mexico. It was important, but my parents still live in Albuquerque. We wanted to be a lot closer to them and get to see them more. So there were some trade-offs, but we get to live in New Mexico and go hiking and go skiing and live here, which is but that economic choice was easier because we didn't have kids. And so we have to do more at every level. The investments we've been making, particularly at the pre-K level, are really meaningful in terms of leveling the playing field for kids. If we're waiting to really invest in kids at high school or above, kids are getting lost at that point. And so to have, I was so fortunate that my mom and dad read with me every day when I was 4 years old, and I was an early reader, and there was a real investment in that. And not every parent is able to do that. And so by really investing in pre-K, we're helping to ensure that kids who may not be getting that at home are able to catch up and succeed. And that's what we have to do. With higher ed, I can tell you, we just have to do so much more about helping students with loans. My parents paid for my undergraduate degree, was a combination of my parents paying for it, and I was able to get in-state tuition and I had a couple scholarships, but I paid for law school myself. I took out a bunch of loans when I went to UNM. And I have been out of law school now for 16 years. I'm 46 years old, and I still owe money on my student loans to law school. And and going to UNM is a bargain. My niece just graduated from law school at Georgetown, and I think she's got to have like $150,000 in loans. And at 25 years old, how does she pay that back and still plan to buy a house or save? Like, that is such an anchor on so many New Mexicans and Americans. And so I'm not to the point that I want to offer free college to everyone yet, because I particularly think that those who are millionaires and billionaires and people who can afford multiple houses, I'm less interested in paying for their education right now. But I definitely think we need to be investing more in those who without some additional support, college would either not be an option at all, or some of these people who are really sort of stuck with these anchors of debt for years and years and years. And so I think we should start with the lowest income Americans and work our way up and see what the federal government can do and states can do to either provide free college or to help people pay off their loans. Because it really is, we're seeing, it used to be, I think, when my parents were kids, there was like a 90% chance that they would exceed their parents' economic success. They do better than their parents would. By the time I was sort of born in the mid 70s, it has reached a point of like maybe 60%. Now I think it's pretty unlikely that kids who are graduating from college today will have the economic success that their parents have had. And so if we're really going to survive and build out this economy, we have to help these young people do that.
Yeah, I get that. I know that you know, like you, I'm still saddled with debt from my graduate degrees, and my undergraduate was all paid for by my GI Bill, which, you know, which a lot of people do it that way. But you know, when you're looking at that debt, and you know that that debt that I have, and maybe the debt that you have, I will probably die and still have debt, you know, 20, 30 years from now. And
Hoping.
you know,
Nope.
I mean, because you know, it just hangs on there. It hangs on and hangs on and hangs on, and it's not meant to go away, because they're making, you know, they're making money. These companies like Betsy DeVos's you know, families companies making money. That's where they make the money, is from what, you know, from what you're paying on in interest, and so it's designed to last forever.
I've been,
And
I don't get to read as much as I used to before I was campaigning, but I've slowly been reading a book called The Fifth Risk that's about the transition from the Obama administration to the Trump administration. And they give multiple examples around, sort of to your point, that, you know, the work the federal government does shouldn't be about making people rich. It's about helping people. And so it talks, I haven't gotten to the part about Betsy DeVos yet, but it talks about the man that was brought in to run NOAA, which runs the weather service. He was one of the family members that runs a company called AccuWeather, and that it talks about how he can sort of go through, and, you know, the Obama administration did such a big push, even in Interior, of making all this data available to the public to use. And we used to have, I'm gonna forget, there was a cool young kid term, hackathons at Interior, where we'd bring young people together to talk about how to take this data, make it into things that people can use. You know, there are members of Congress who have gone on the record at hearings saying, well, I don't know why we're funding NOAA. I'm just getting all my weather from the weather app. Where the weather app gets their information? From the federal
right,
government, right? And
right.
so all these people who are profiteering from their work, Betsy DeVos, the guy that ran the EPA, Scott Pruitt, you know, the guy at NOAA, this is the horrible. This is people just trying to profit off of federal government, and we have to get those people out.
Right. Yeah, we really do. Um, looks like we're right there at the end. So I am going to give you a minute to appeal directly to your voters about why they should be voting for you. But before you do that, I just want to say I just watched your new ad, and it is fun. It is hilarious. It is. I mean, it's brilliant. And anybody who hasn't seen it should just go see it, just for the fun of it.
Appreciate that.
So just appeal to them why they should be voting for you.
Perfect, man. Well, thank you so much for having me again. There are 7 Democrats running this race. They're all very good people. What separates me from the rest of the candidates running is my experience and my ability to genuinely hit the ground running. I am the only candidate in this race who has worked for President Obama. I am the only candidate in this race who has any Capitol Hill experience. You know, I worked in the US Senate for Jeff Bingaman. I worked in the House of Representatives for Martin Heinrich, and that experience is meaningful, particularly right now. I mean, even before this pandemic, we had a climate crisis, we still do, an ongoing constitutional crisis, an epidemic of gun violence, a long epidemic of opioids and heroin and meth abuse in this state. As I've driven across this district, I've seen firsthand housing crises in almost every community, infrastructure crises everywhere. There's too much at stake right now to be electing someone to Congress who's going to be learning on the job. I've worked in the US House. I've been on the House floor with Representative Heinrich when he's introducing amendments. I've been in the committee hearings. I know what levers of government to push, to pull, to really pull resources and ideas and things to the congressional district that I want to represent and to the whole state. And we are not a district or a state that can afford for someone to be going there and figuring out what they want to do. And so that is genuinely what sets me apart, is my ability to honestly hit the ground running and really work hard for this district and bring home the bacon, if you will. And so I will tell your viewers, thank you for watching. If you'd like to learn more about me or watch my TV ad, my website and my social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, are all John Blair for New Mexico. And I would love to earn your vote. If you're interested and you want to volunteer, you can click on the volunteer button on our website. If you'd like to make a donation, since I'm not taking corporate PAC money, you can click on the donate button, but I'd love to earn your support. And Matt, thank you again for having me join you today. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, and I'll have your website information below in the comments, and also and I think right under your image, your website information should be there also for people to see.
Thank you.
And you know, absolutely. And thank you everybody out there for viewing today. And I urge you to go spend some time and learn more about your candidates, learn more about John Blair, and see what sets each one apart and which makes which one the one that you should be selecting. And the primary is so important. Primary voting is more important, I think, than even the general election, because this is the election that you decide who's going to be on your ballot as your party representative, and then is more likely then that people will be happy with that choice and then vote in the general election. So please, please pay attention to your primary candidates. On that, please also click the subscribe button so that you don't miss any of these important discussions with your political candidates and other political figures. And thank you so much, everybody, for viewing. And thank you again for being here, John. It's been a real pleasure.
I want to come back. You let me know when.
Yeah, absolutely. You will be gladly invited back.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody.